Good morning, Adam, and welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Andy.
It's great to have you here. This is the final day of the Learning and Teaching Festival. I can't believe the week's sort of gone very quickly and a lot has been happening. Have you managed to see anything that's happening over the week, or is it just a day for you?
Guiltily, no, I haven't actually. It's induction next week, so there's been quite a bit of preps. But yeah, I'm looking forward to today.
I was saying there's no good time to do anything in university, so you just have to kind of put it in somewhere and hope people can get to it. I've seen there's been great attendance over the week, which is fantastic, and in some ways it's a great way to sort of finish as well, because the theme for today is unpacking excellence. And I think a lot of the people that have been speaking have been trying to do that all week, really, because it comes back down to how do we improve what we're delivering at university, but also make sure that we're thinking critically about what excellence means, which I think is a big part of the challenge, actually, because it's also quite dynamic. So today you're going to be talking about students as partners and co-designing curricula. Tell us first of all a bit about your background. What do you do at the university? How did you get into this world?
Okay, so I'm a psychology lecturer. I've been at Salford now since 2007, so I've been here for quite a long time. My background is in psychology. I worked as a psychology researcher and then came here as a lecturer. My background was actually in an area called cognitive psychology, which is understanding how the mind works. But I started working in media psychology about 10 years ago. We run the UK's first media psychology masters, which I'm very proud of, at Media City. And I am segueing into what my presentation is about, because part of what I do with the media psychology is work on kind of technology design, user experience design. And one of the methods that I've become really interested in over the years is participatory design. So bringing together designers and users of technology to try and make sure that users' needs are met when you're designing new products. And so I think quite a lot of my thinking from that area of my work has fed into the project I'm going to talk about today, which is bringing students and staff together to co-design the curriculum.
Fantastic. And for those that aren't sort of familiar with what it means, because obviously we think about education as we develop a curriculum, we deliver it to students. So co-designing is about involving them in the process of thinking what we teach them. Tell us a bit more about that.
So co-designing, or it's most often called co-creation, actually, in the educational literature, and it's quite broad. So it can mean involving students in the design of discrete elements like an assessment or a topic to teach, or it could be that you involve them in kind of designing a whole module or even a whole program. So it's quite a broad term. The way we've used it is we have an area of our teaching called cognitive psychology, which is quite a big part of psychology. We teach it all years of our undergrad, but it traditionally hasn't really performed very well. Students don't seem very engaged with this topic. Their option module in the final year, not a lot of students seem to want to study cognitive psychology as an option. So we really wanted to know what was going on there, because obviously as the lecturers on that topic, we're really fascinated. So why aren't the students really fascinated?
Yeah.
And then I started to think about the stuff I was doing in media psychology on participatory design, and thought, okay, instead of just relying on student feedback, why don't we actually try and assemble a team of students and staff, get together and try and design something new together? And actually we went in very broadly. We were kind of quite prepared for a big overhaul if that was what emerged from the work that we did.
So this is then working with an existing cohort with a view to delivering something new for the subsequent cohort.
Yes, kind of, yeah. And actually, it's interesting that you picked up on that, because I think that is one of the issues with co-creation, is that sometimes you're asking students to kind of be involved in something they're not going to benefit from. So they're working to design something, but the future generations are the ones who are going to benefit. And that is actually something that I touch on in the talk later today. But actually, some of the changes could potentially be implemented quite quickly, depending on the extent of those changes and depending if they fit within what we've already kind of had put through the approval processes, which again is another kind of tension there, because we have modules approved and we've kind of designed what we say we're going to deliver. And then if students and staff together come up with some kind of really great idea, but it doesn't fit with what we've already promised, then there's a kind of a lengthy process to get that all kind of redesigned and reapproved. And that means that those students who helped you create that thing then might not benefit from it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think. It's interesting because we've had different approaches to thinking about these things over the week. And it makes me wonder about how you could have the same process for, let's say you've got a level 5, so second year undergraduates that are then engaged in a process that for the subsequent year, that then they're involved with a module that is delivered, and you get that co-creation or co-design happening before they take it. And I think it can work interesting ways, quite differently. But tell us about how it's worked for this module then. So have you gone through this process the last academic year? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we've had loads of ideas generated that we're quite
Yeah.
keen on. But one of them was really simple to implement, and that was that so cognitive psychology can be quite theoretical. And one thing that really came out from the students was that they couldn't quite see the link to the real world.
Okay.
And they felt that was kind of making them a bit disengaged. Nothing was really lighting the spark. That was a term that came from the students. We need something to light the spark.
Yeah.
And they suggested wrapping the theories around kind of topical issues, things that were current in the news, things that were important. And so that was something that we've been able to implement really easily. We just kind of flipped the emphasis on its head, started with the real world topic and built the theory around that. It's been easier for some topics than others. Actually, that's been quite well received, and we have seen improvements in metrics, to the extent that the metrics are reliable. The metrics seem to suggest that actually that has had some improvement. So that's been easy to do, but then there's been some kind of more radical changes that we're having to think more carefully about how we might implement.
What sort of things? I'm curious now.
Well, so one of the things that, and actually this builds on one of the podcasts that you did yesterday, the virtually field trips, because this discussion of the kind of real world application, and another discussion that we also had around kind of getting out of the lecture, kind of death by PowerPoint, mixing up how we taught. One of the ideas that emerged from that was virtual reality and also mobile learning. So those are quite kind of radical things to introduce if you're not experienced with those technologies, but also really exciting. So, when those kind of came up in the workshops and we were discussing them in the project team, we were all really, really enthused. And then we start to look at, how do we implement this? And okay, this isn't something we can just kind of instantly put in next week's lecture. This is going to require quite a bit of thought, familiarization with the technology, building environments potentially. So that was some of the more radical stuff.
And so just so I'm clear, mobile learning, do you mean mobile as in learning through their mobile devices? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it often is through mobile devices. It's a way that to get students out of the classroom, being able to move around environments, potentially kind of record things that are relevant to cognitive psychology out in the world. So cognitive psychology covers things like how we read signs, driver behavior, our attention in supermarkets. So there's loads of places where we could get students to go around, and with their mobile phone they could collect, we could gamify, we could have QR codes scattered around. It's something that I've done on media psychology actually, but we've got a lot fewer students there, so it's a lot easier to manage. We've got 100 odds in our class in cognitive psychology, but it's just an idea that we've discussed a bit.
Well, it's interesting because I think the another theme that's sort of come up over the week in these conversations is actually a lot of the platforms that we use for delivering education, they aren't platforms that are used beyond that. And actually there's that kind of disconnect between the interfaces that they have and the systems available to actually what they not just use in the future, but also what they're using already. So the kind of understanding what you can do with platforms like Instagram, TikTok, these places where a lot of their lived reality is located within these environments.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree to an extent, but one of the things that we put some ideas that emerged from these co-creation workshops back to the wider student body through an online survey. And one of the ideas that we put to them was kind of a library of user-generated content. And we thought that this would go down well, kind of within the sort of rhetoric of the digital natives, that they're all doing this sort of stuff and they would all like it. But actually, we got really diverse opinions back on that, with some students saying, well, actually, this would exclude people who aren't really kind of digitally savvy or digitally interested. And it was a bit surprising. We sort of expected some resistance from staff about that, but we felt that there would be more kind of unified acceptance from the students. But actually, there were really diverse responses.
And that's, I think, what's really interesting is that designing curriculum just generally, but how do you make something that is flexible enough for everybody to feel that this works for them?
Yeah, and actually, this is something I'm going to discuss a bit in my presentation. But one of the issues with, I think, co-creation is it's quite a demand on the time of students to take part, and not everyone has the willingness or ability to actually take part in these kind of more
Yes.
involved co-creation activities. And then that leads you to wonder, do the things that you create benefit particular parts of the student body and not others? So those students who have a lot of time, who maybe don't have competing
Yes.
demands, who are already very motivated to kind of work with staff and probably academically quite confident because they're working with staff. What about those students who are maybe more time pressured, or maybe less engaged in the first place, or maybe less confident about kind of taking part in those more dynamic staff-student relationships?
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing problem. It's been talked about in the literature, and I think it's certainly something that came out of our project as well.
Well, it's certainly interesting to hear, because it makes me think about how you deal with, I guess, what happens over a module, over a trimester, where you then sort of start off with a very sort of optimistic, everyone's sort of ahead of the game, but then some people in the cohort may slip behind, struggle to keep up. And if you sort of have in mind that concept of partnership that you sort of put in your title for today, it relies very much on just having that honest transaction of what's going on, really. And if you can sort of promote that so that you do understand actually there are barriers to engagement that make it really difficult, you can then perhaps respond to that as well. I think that's the key thing. If you don't quite know what's going on, it's really hard to be agile.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think how you provide avenues for everybody to feedback or give their input is one of the challenges. And I think this comes back to one of the points that you were making about the kind of the systems that we use within education aren't really used in the everyday life of our students. Because I very optimistically set up a discussion board on my Blackboard site, a co-creation discussion board, because I thought, okay, so some students have the time to come and kind of work with us more in depth, face to face, and meet with us for an hour or so. Some students might not have that luxury, but if I put up a discussion board, then that will give them an opportunity to kind of just drop their thoughts in, and we can maybe have a discussion on there instead. It really didn't work effectively at all. The discussion board wasn't used, and that's been my experience with the discussion boards for all kinds of different purposes on Blackboard. How to kind of encourage more activity on there. If you have any answers, I'd love to know.
Well, I have similar problems, actually. I think so. Last year we set up a couple of Discord groups for modules and for cohorts, just program cohorts. And again, it's tricky, because I think partly the challenge is you want to sort of engage students on emerging platforms. You're at university. We're not just using the things that are already there. We want to involve you on things that are emerging. And actually, Discord's a platform that's quite very established now, but it's still not used, I think, by the majority of people within sort of our worlds. And similarly, I think unless you are someone that is very digitally engaged, then Discord isn't a platform that you're using. So I wanted to sort of promote it, to say, well, look, this is the future of communication. Let's all jump into this for the year. But again, until you can establish that as a habit, it's really hard to have any meaningful engagement unless we make the whole module about Discord. So it is, I think, a really difficult one to do. But again, it sounds like what you're doing is the right way to go, to make sure people do sort of feel part of that process of designing it. Maybe what I'll do this trimester is say to students at the start, look, let's have a communication channel that's outside the grid of the university. What should it be? And see if we can get people just to decide for themselves where that is. And maybe it's WhatsApp, maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's Discord. I don't know, but maybe that's the starting point.
Yeah, and I like that idea a lot. I think that's a really good idea. One of the things that has worked quite well in the co-creation approach is I embedded some co-creation activities in induction last year, and it sort of served two purposes, I think, which was successful. And one was to come up with some ideas, which meant that, and because they were right at the beginning of the year, I did have time to implement some of those ideas. And the other was, it was a really good opportunity for us all just to get to know each other. The activities were designed to be quite fun, a little bit kind of frivolous, and the students seemed to really enjoy them, I think. But actually what we got from those were some workable ideas which I had time to actually get going. And I think that the question you just posed about, what channel should we use is it's quite a simple one, but actually, could really change the color of how the whole year unfolds.
It could. It reminds me actually of a lecture I gave for one of our masters in public health last academic year, and it's off the back of a lot of the development we've been doing in virtual reality this year, where we launched a virtual reality campus. And I gave a talk where this is quite a flexible platform, Spatial, the platform's called, and it allows anybody from whatever device they have, whether they've got a VR headset, a mobile phone, or a computer, to jump into the virtual reality world and move around using their avatar. So if you've got a mobile device, you can just sort of click and move your avatar around this space. And so as an experiment, I tried to get all these students into it the first 10 minutes of the lecture, and it actually worked really well. Everyone had a collective experience. It was slightly different for everybody, but it was still something that they could just sort of enjoy and have some fun in. I think finding the minimal barrier to getting into the space is probably a key part of that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I'd love to hear more about how that actually works. That'd be brilliant.
So co-designing curricula is obviously a theme that I think is emerging in lots of the work we're doing. It seems like where we need to be with that notion of partnership in mind is where we think about not just having student reps that kind of represent the bodies of students to convey what they're feeling, but actually have a bigger, and not even just sort of module questionnaires at the end of the module, but actually that ongoing almost committee or group of people that are involved in the process in a more ongoing way. Do you think that needs to be formalized to a greater extent to have those structures in place?
I'm certainly kind of working towards that in my own practice, exploring different methods and seeing what's successful with recognizing the challenges of trying to get everyone involved, giving everyone the opportunity to contribute. And I don't want this just to kind of privilege those students who have the luxury of time and already academically kind of self-confident. So formalizing it, I'm not really sure. I would worry that if it was formalized at a university level, then the processes wouldn't work at a local level. So I think it's something that kind of individual courses or groups of courses kind of work out how best to do themselves.
Yes.
I mean, I've already noticed differences in kind of doing these sorts of things with undergrads and doing these sorts of things with master's students, for instance. And I'm sure across disciplines, it is very different as well.
Yeah, and actually, it's sort of a theme that again has come up over the week, that just listening to students, understanding how best how we can optimize their learning, but also I think I'm conscious of the fact that having come out of COVID, many students that are entering university have missed out on a great deal of education and that relationship with their teachers. But also, it's a massive change to go from school or even college into a university where you begin to see your teacher as someone that is a collaborator rather than just someone that's going to deliver content to you. And I think that shift is again something that kind of needs to be nailed quite early on in the development so that people see it as a partnership. So we don't just treat students in that way, but they can see us in that way as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's similar to another point about the kind of marketization of higher education and the students seeing themselves as a consumer.
Yes.
Because on the one hand, that's given birth to the kind of the emphasis on student voice. There are customers, we need to listen to them. But on the other hand, with something like co-creation, where you're asking a lot of time from students and you're asking for their ideas, I think sometimes there's the thought, well, we're paying for this service. Why are we also giving our time to kind of design the service?
Yes.
Because I think if like really kind of involved co-creation activities, and particularly if the student themselves won't benefit, the future generations will benefit. Really is asking them to be kind of citizens of the university and like belonging to the community. And it's quite an active process. And the kind of consumerization, I think, sometimes positions students as very kind of passive receivers of the service that we're providing. So there's this kind of weird tension here. But then, sorry, I've drifted off from your point, which was about kind of this seeing teachers as these people who kind of just provide the education for you, and you're not an equal partner in that, and how to shift that way of thinking. And I think that is a really important challenge. I don't have an answer for you. I've talked for a long time thinking maybe something will pop into my head, but
well, I think it's certainly food for thought, but it sort of reminds me, sort of going into the trimester now and coming to the end of the festival, it's sort of getting that reflective process into your teaching is such a crucial part of both coming to terms with what's going on within the student body's lives. So you understand that, in fact, every year these things are changing. You know, a lot of our students are working part-time hours now, and some of those hours, you know, become full-time almost for some of them. And I think appreciating that sort of dynamic, complex life is such a key part of what we do. So thank you so much for being here, Adam. It's great to have this as a sort of wrap-up conversation for the week for us on the podcast, because I think it's just reminds us again that the key thing is to listen and engage and involve the students in that process, which it sounds like you're doing in fantastic ways. So good luck with the talk today. I hope it goes really well. And yeah, look forward to talking VR with you again soon, hopefully.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thanks very much, Andy.
Take care, Adam. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye now.